Dr. Phil McGraw had heard every kind of story. In 30 years of doing this, he'd sat across from people carrying secrets that had destroyed families, truths that had been buried for decades, confessions that changed everything the moment they hit the air. He'd developed a sense for the real ones. The stories that weren't performances. The people who'd come not for television but because they'd run out of every other option, and this was the last door left. Margaret was 61 years old. She didn't look like someone with a bombshell. She looked like someone's grandmother. Gray-streaked hair pulled back neatly. A floral blouse. Sensible shoes. She sat in the green room before the taping with her hands folded in her lap and a canvas tote bag by her feet, the kind you get free at a library fundraiser. She'd been calm during the pre-interview. Almost unnervingly calm. Like someone who had decided, finally and completely, that today was the day. Whatever happened next, today was the day. The segment was supposed to be straightforward. A woman who believed her late husband had hidden a second family from her for the entirety of their 30-year marriage. Allegations. Suspicions. The kind of story the show had covered before. Painful but familiar. The producers had mapped out the structure. The guest would explain her suspicions, Dr. Phil would probe gently, they'd explore the emotional fallout. Standard. Nobody knew about the tote bag. The show opened normally. Dr. Phil introduced Margaret. She walked out to polite applause, sat down, smoothed her skirt. Composed. The audience saw a woman holding herself together carefully, the way people do when they've been holding themselves together for so long it's become the only way they know how to exist. Dr. Phil started with the basics. How long had she been married? When did the suspicions begin? What had she seen, heard, felt that made her believe something was wrong? Margaret answered each question clearly. No dramatics. Just facts, delivered in a steady voice by someone who had rehearsed this in her head so many times that the words had lost their edges. She'd been married to Richard for 31 years. He'd died 14 months ago. Heart attack. Sudden. And in the weeks after his death, while she was sorting through his belongings, she'd found things that didn't add up. Phone records. A P.O. box she hadn't known about. Receipts from a city 3 hours away, dated consistently, every few weeks, for years. Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. He'd caught something in her delivery. A specific hesitation before the word. Years. The kind of pause that meant there was more. That what she just said was the surface of something much deeper. He leaned forward slightly. Margaret, he said carefully, you said you found things that didn't add up. But you're describing this very calmly. Like someone who has already processed the worst of it. She looked at him steadily. I have. Because I know. What do you know? Everything. The audience shifted. The word landed differently than the ones before it. Not an allegation. Not a suspicion. A statement of fact from someone who had done the work of finding out. Walk me through that. Dr. Phil said. Margaret reached down. Picked up the canvas tote bag. Set it on her lap. And for the first time since she'd sat down, her composure cracked, not into tears, but into something harder and more deliberate. She reached into the bag and pulled out a manila envelope. Thick. Secured with a rubber band. She held it in both hands for a moment. Then she looked at Dr. Phil. 31 years, she said. I gave him 31 years. I raised his children. I built a life with him. And for 23 of those years, he had another family. Another woman. 3 children. A house. A life that ran parallel to mine so cleanly that I never saw it. Not once. She set the envelope on the table between them. It's all in there. Everything. I didn't come here with suspicions, Dr. Phil. I came here with proof. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He stood up. Walked directly to the production booth at the side of the stage. The cameras kept rolling, catching him mid-stride, catching the crew's confused expressions. He leaned in and said something quietly to his producer. Then he walked back to his seat, sat down, and said 3 words that made the entire studio hold its breath. "Bring it in." A producer appeared from the side of the stage carrying a second, larger folder. Dr. Phil took it, set it beside Margaret's envelope. Then he looked at the audience, then at the cameras, then at Margaret. "Before we open this," he said, "I want you to understand something. What's in these documents is going to change this conversation significantly. And I want to make sure that what happens next serves you, Margaret. Not the show. Not the audience. You. Are you ready?" Margaret nodded once. Sharp. The nod of someone who'd been ready for 14 months. Dr. Phil opened the envelope. The audience couldn't see the contents from their seats, but they could see Dr. Phil's face. And his face told the story that the documents contained. The slight tightening around his eyes. The controlled exhale. The moment a man who processes difficult information professionally encountered something that exceeded even his considerable threshold for difficult information. He looked up at Margaret. "You did this yourself? All of this research?" 14 months, she said. "Every night after the kids went to sleep. Every weekend. Every hour I wasn't at work. I needed to know. I needed to know everything. And you never confronted anyone? Never reached out to the other family?" "Not yet." She paused. "I wanted to do it right. I wanted documentation. I wanted to be sure. Because I knew that when I finally said this out loud, I needed it to be undeniable. Not just for them. For me. So I could never doubt myself again. But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. Dr. Phil set down the documents, leaned back in his chair. And for a long moment he didn't speak. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. Long enough for the audience to understand that something was happening that wasn't in the show notes. Long enough for the producer in the booth to decide not to cut to commercial. Long enough for Margaret to see in Dr. Phil's face something she hadn't expected to find in a television studio. Someone who was genuinely affected. "Margaret," Dr. Phil finally said, his voice different now. "In 30 years of doing this show, I have sat across from thousands of people in pain. And I want you to hear me clearly when I say this. What you have done, the discipline, the patience, the methodical way you have documented this truth, is one of the most extraordinary things I have ever witnessed in this chair." The audience exhaled collectively. The sound of 300 people releasing something they'd been holding. "You didn't fall apart," Dr. Phil continued. "You didn't confront. You didn't destroy yourself with anger. You did the hardest thing a person can do when they've been betrayed. You got quiet. You got systematic. And you built a record that cannot be argued with." Margaret's eyes were wet. First time since she'd sat down. "I had to," she said simply. "I had to know the truth. Even if the truth was the worst thing I'd ever find." Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Dr. Phil reached into his jacket, pulled out a business card. But not his own. He held it up so the cameras could see. "This is the name of a family attorney who specializes in posthumous estate disputes and cases involving hidden assets and secondary families. She's one of the best in the country. And she's agreed to consult with you at no charge." Margaret stared at the card. "Why?" "Because you deserve to have your 31 years acknowledged legally, not just emotionally. Because Richard's estate, his assets, potentially his life insurance, you have rights, Margaret. And I want to make sure you have someone in your corner who can fight for them." He slid the card across. Margaret picked it up, turned it over in her fingers. This small rectangle of paper that represented the first concrete step toward a justice she'd been building toward alone for over a year. "There's something else," Dr. Phil said. He looked toward the side of the stage. "Margaret, you said you haven't reached out to the other family yet. The other woman. The children. No. Have you thought about what you want to do?" Because they're also victims here. Those children didn't choose this situation any more than your children did. The audience murmured. This was the complication nobody had fully considered. The woman on the other side of Richard's deception. The children who'd grown up believing their family was real and whole. Who were, at this moment, living with a version of their history that was about to be fundamentally altered. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. I know, she finally said. I've thought about it. A lot. And I don't blame her. I don't blame the children. Richard made choices. He's the one who built this. And he died before anyone could make him account for it. She paused. But yes. I think they deserve to know. Not because I want to hurt them. Because they deserve the truth the same way I deserved it. Dr. Phil nodded slowly. That's a remarkable thing to say. It would be completely understandable if you felt differently. I did feel differently. For about 6 months, I wanted to burn everything down. She said it simply, without apology. But I have children too. And I kept asking myself, what do I want them to learn from watching me handle this? And the answer wasn't destruction. It was truth. The audience was completely still. The kind of still that happens when something being said is landing not just as story but as instruction. As example. As the lived demonstration of a principle that most people only ever encounter in the abstract. Dr. Phil looked at the cameras. At the people watching at home. What Margaret just described, the shift from rage to clarity, from the impulse to destroy to the decision to document, to pursue truth rather than revenge, that is one of the most difficult psychological transitions a human being can make. And she did it alone. In the dark. Over 14 months. Without a therapist, without a support group, without anyone who even knew what she was carrying. He turned back to Margaret. We're going to change that today. Starting now, you're going to have support. Real support. Professional support. Because what comes next, the legal process, the conversation with the other family, the ongoing grief of losing a marriage you thought was real, none of that should be done alone. Margaret looked at him steadily. You believe me. I believe you. Dr. Phil said. No hesitation. I believe every word. And more importantly, I believe in the courage it took to sit in that chair today and put 31 years of your life on a table in a television studio because you decided the truth mattered more than the privacy of your pain. The audience rose. Not all at once. In a wave. Starting from the front rows and moving back. The sound was different from the usual applause. Slower. More deliberate. The sound of people who understood, at least in part, what they were acknowledging. Margaret didn't look at the audience. She looked at the card in her hand. The small, practical rectangle that represented the next step. Then she looked at the envelope. 31 years of her life, reduced to documents in a manila folder, sitting on a coffee table in a television studio under bright lights. And somehow, impossibly, that was okay. Because the documents were real. The truth was real. And for the first time in 14 months, she wasn't the only person in the world who knew it. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. In the weeks that followed, Margaret connected with the attorney. The estate case moved forward. The legal process was slow and complicated and painful in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. But it moved. The other woman, when Margaret finally reached out through a mutual intermediary, responded not with anger but with the exhausted recognition of someone who had also been lied to. They never became friends. But they reached an understanding. Two women who had loved the same man and been deceived by him equally. Who decided, separately and then together, that they would not let his deception define what came next. The envelope stayed with Margaret. Not filed away. Not hidden. On her kitchen counter, where she could see it every morning. A reminder that she had done the hard thing. That she had chosen truth over comfort, documentation over denial, clarity over the easier path of not knowing. Dr. Phil kept a copy of the case in his files. Not for television. For himself. A reminder that sometimes the bravest person in the room arrives carrying a canvas tote bag and sensible shoes, having already done the work that everyone else assumed was impossible. The card never left Margaret's wallet. Some tools you keep close. Not because you need them every day. Because knowing they exist changes the way you carry yourself. She'd spent 31 years building a life on a foundation that wasn't what she thought it was. And then 14 months rebuilding herself on something no one could take away. The truth. Documented. Undeniable. Entirely hers.